this is BAWLER. Hello, I have prepared an important and interesting video for you. Subscribe and write in the comments what you think about it. Russian propaganda channels never miss an opportunity to celebrate even the smallest battlefield event. Whenever Russian forces capture a settlement, no matter how insignificant or remote, state television erupts with triumphant victory music, parades its newest so-called wonder weapons, and fills the airwaves with declarations of unstoppable success. Yet this glossy image is only a facade. Behind the curtain, the Kremlin's war machine is plagued by shortages, inefficiencies, and systemic failures that no amount of staged footage can hide. 3.5 years into what Vladimir Putin personally vowed would be a quick and decisive special military operation, the reality is stark. Russia is not only failing to achieve its strategic goals in Ukraine, it is running dangerously low on the essential tools and materials needed to sustain the war effort. The situation is so severe that even the Kremlin's own figures, usually manipulated for propaganda purposes, reveal a staggering decline in capacity. From high-tech weapons to the most basic supplies like rubber tires, Russia's military-industrial complex is bleeding resources at a rate that would make any defense minister break into a cold sweat. Each individual shortage is damaging on its own, but together they point to something far more alarming: a systemic breakdown of military infrastructure that took decades to build. This collapse is perhaps most visible in one of the defining technologies of modern warfare: drones. Specifically, small, agile, first-person view (FPV) drones, which have transformed how battles are fought in the 21st century. Even Vladimir Putin, a man famously unwilling to admit weakness, has publicly acknowledged that Russian forces are desperately short of such drones. In an unusual display of candor, he ordered domestic factories to drastically increase FPV drone production, noting, "I know perfectly well, and many of those participating in our meeting today know it no worse than I do, that these means of defeat are still insufficient." This admission is damning in itself, because by the Kremlin's own numbers, Russia has procured more than 1.5 million drones since the start of the full-scale invasion, with roughly 4,000 FPVs arriving at the front each day. Yet even with these staggering quantities, Moscow still considers its stockpile inadequate. The battlefield results support that assessment. At the end of 2022, Russian forces controlled around 18% of Ukrainian territory. 2.5 years later, after expending those 1.5 million drones along with countless other weapons, that figure has increased to just about 20%, and even that number is disputed. In other words, hundreds of thousands of drones, millions of shells, and billions of dollars have yielded a net gain of roughly 2% of Ukraine's landmass. To understand why drones are such a decisive factor, one must grasp how they have fundamentally altered modern combat. FPV drones are typically small commercial devices, the kind used for recreational filming, retrofitted with explosives, cameras, or other payloads. They cost anywhere from $500 to $3,000 each, a fraction of the cost of traditional military systems that can run into the millions. This affordability, combined with their precision and adaptability, has sparked a revolution in warfare akin to the transformation brought by military aviation during the First World War. Ukraine recognized the potential of FPV drones early and adapted rapidly, deploying thousands per day for surgical strikes against Russian positions, vehicles, and even individual soldiers. These low-cost weapons have turned consumer electronics into tank-destroying tools, often outmaneuvering expensive armored vehicles in ways traditional artillery cannot. Russia, in contrast, remained locked in Soviet-era doctrines that emphasized centralized, large-scale firepower, massed artillery barrages, and rocket salvos, at the expense of the distributed, flexible capabilities that drones provide. This doctrinal rigidity has been costly. Without adequate FPV drone coverage, many Russian units are effectively blind on the battlefield, relying on outdated reconnaissance methods while being systematically picked apart by swarms of Ukrainian drones. Ukraine's decentralized, fast-moving drone teams have repeatedly destroyed Russian tanks, artillery pieces, and supply convoys before they can be deployed effectively. Drones are only one piece of the puzzle. Another critical shortage lies in precision-guided munitions. At the start of the war, Russia showcased advanced weaponry such as Caliber cruise missiles and Iskander ballistic missiles, symbols of its claimed technological prowess. Yet, defense analysts have observed a troubling shift. Russia is increasingly using S-300 surface-to-air missiles, designed in the 1970s to intercept high-altitude aircraft, as improvised ground attack weapons. The implications of this are enormous. A single caliber missile costs around $1 million and can strike targets over 100 miles away with meter-level precision. By contrast, S-300s are less accurate against ground targets, far more expensive than artillery shells, and never intended for such use. This switch signals not innovation but desperation, the depletion of Russia's stockpile of modern precision munitions. Production bottlenecks are severe. By mid-2023, Russia's military industry was producing only about 60 guided missiles per month, nowhere near enough to maintain consistent pressure on Ukraine. To fill the gap, the Kremlin turned to Soviet-era glide bombs such as the FAB-500, a 500-kilogram bomb retrofitted with crude guidance systems. While such bombs can cause massive destruction, their accuracy is poor, and Ukrainian air defenses have become increasingly adept at countering them. Sanctions have made matters worse by cutting off Russia's access to microchips, the lifeblood of modern weapon systems. In March 2025, a major semiconductor plant in Stavropol shut down because the government paid less for chips than it cost to manufacture them. The shortage of quality microelectronics forces Russia to seek parts on the black market or from questionable allies like Iran and China, often resulting in inferior components. This problem has manifested in absurd battlefield improvisations, such as the infamous case in 2022, when a Russian Su-34 fighter jet was found with a commercial GPS taped to the cockpit because its military navigation system had failed. Even more alarming for Moscow is the dwindling supply of explosives like TNT and RDX. These are essential for filling artillery shells, missile warheads, and aerial bombs. Satellite imagery shows Russia rushing to complete a new RDX production facility in Siberia, a sign of critical shortages. Imports from North Korea have been attempted, but their quality is reportedly so poor as to be nearly useless. Despite producing around 3 million artillery shells annually, more than NATO combined, Russia's advantage is eroding. Ukrainian long-range drone strikes have successfully targeted ammunition depots deep inside Russian territory, sometimes over 2,500 miles from the front lines. This has forced Russia to move production further east, increasing logistical complexity and costs. The personnel situation is equally dire. Russia is running out of competent junior officers, lieutenants and captains who serve as the vital link between high-level planning and on-the-ground execution. Training new officers to a professional standard takes years, and despite plans to open 33 new military schools, meaningful results will not appear until 2028 or later. This comes on top of staggering manpower losses, estimated at over 1 million troops since the start of the war. Economically, the strain is unsustainable. Oil and gas revenues, Russia's main source of income, fell by 34% year-on-year in June 2025. Defense spending now consumes 40% of the federal budget, starving sectors like education, healthcare, and infrastructure. With reserves dwindling, the Kremlin has begun raiding Soviet-era stockpiles of tanks and vehicles. Many of these, such as the T-55, date back to the 1950s and are hopelessly obsolete on a modern battlefield. The decline is visible everywhere. From worn-out tires on military trucks, a consequence of sanctions on specialized rubber compounds, to museum-piece tanks pressed back into service, Russia's armed forces are cannibalizing themselves to keep the war going. Mobility is becoming a critical weakness. Without quality tires, vehicles risk becoming immobilized, especially during Ukraine's muddy autumn and spring seasons. All these shortages, drones, missiles, explosives, microchips, trained officers, fuel revenues, armored vehicles, and even tires, combine into what military theorists call systemic degradation, a cascading failure of multiple interdependent systems, each amplifying the weaknesses of the others. Russia entered this war boasting of being the world's second most powerful military, with a vast industrial base and supposedly endless reserves of Soviet hardware. Now, 3.5 years later, it is rationing explosives, dismantling its own stockpiles for parts, improvising weapons from outdated systems, and burning through resources faster than they can possibly be replaced. This is not merely a temporary setback, it is the real-time collapse of a military-industrial complex that took generations to build. The war machine is drying up, and in its desperation, it is consuming itself.